Okay, I think it has started. Yes. Good. Well, then, welcome back to Dare to Care, the podcast where we explore the stories, challenges, and the solutions shaping the future of animal welfare. My name is Masha. I'm your host today, and I'm always happy to learn more and also talk more about animal welfare. Today we're joined by Steffi from Spirit Dog Training. Steffi brings a deeply thoughtful, experience-based perspective on dog training, a topic that I haven't talked about very deep, or not in depth very much, so I'm really looking forward to have now the chance. And, her perspective definitely goes beyond, as far as I've read so far, beyond obedience and performance, and really ask how our human methods actually shape dogs' emotional well-being, and then overall the quality of life of a dog. I'm really looking forward. I'm excited to explore what compassionate but also ethical training can look like in practice. A very warm welcome, Steffi.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So, funnily, we found out that both of us are from Germany originally, so that was a bit surprise for me. So how did you end up training dogs in the US? What was the path for you where you are right now? Kind of the animal welfare or the animal love in general that maybe shaped your path so far?
Yeah, so I was one of those kids who truly didn't know what I wanted to become, basically all the way through high school. The one thing I knew was that I did love animals very, very much, but I really didn't have the vision of I want to find an online dog training business. I was very much undecided about what I wanted to become. I was considering becoming an opera singer or studying logic. And in the end, I actually studied physics. Really not because I loved physics, but because I thought, it's a good start to learn how to think logically and kind of keep my options open. And then we moved to the US when I was 22. And when we first moved here, I actually did not have a work visa. I was staying at home with my young son and I was a little bored and I got a border collie and I started teaching a bunch of tricks to that border collie. And, they learn so fast and it's so fun. And I was so amazed by how I could think up these very elaborate concepts like, walk backwards and touch your left foot to the wall or something like this. And I could actually communicate that to the dog through training. It blew my mind. And I started to film those videos and put them on my Facebook, and some of them went viral. And a local dog training center actually saw them and they said, hey, would you like to come and teach one class for us? So this is how I got started, basically just experimenting with my own dog. Some other people saw it. I taught one class, 2 classes, 10 classes, and now 13 years later, here we are.
Wow, that's crazy. Especially when just like learning by doing, right? So that's also something what I found really interesting, that when talking about or when we use the term experts, it can mean a lot actually. And like you telling me that story of, you've just started with your own dog and became an expert by practicing it and just like learning how to communicate. So how would you describe maybe that journey of becoming the expert in that specific field?
Oh, yes, that's a good question. And first of all, the journey is really not finished. Every single day I learn so many things. It's really not about getting to any one endpoint for me. Initially, what was really interesting to me is that the way that many people would train a dog, that we kind of would intuitively try and teach them something, is totally not how they learn best. So, for example, let's say somebody picked up a dog from the shelter and they want to teach that dog to sit. How most people would start out is they say sit, 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 and then they hope that the dog will magically know what it means and will sit down, and if so, they get a cookie. And that's actually a really frustrating way of learning because the dog does not know what sit means. And to try and teach them by just saying the word kind of more and more drastically until the poor dog finally is intimidated enough to sit down. That's really a very fun way of learning, right? And this is how we end up with dogs that don't really understand the meaning of verbal cues, or that maybe are guessing more or less. It's the same actually with teaching a dog to come when called. Many people, they'll just say come, and then the dog either comes or doesn't come, right? And then they get mad when the dog doesn't come. So the first really big realization for me was that how you actually train dogs is you first make a behavior happen. We can talk in detail about what this looks like. And then once the dog can reliably perform this behavior, then we add the verbal cue. So most people have it totally backwards. So this is the first thing that I realized. So for example, with the sit, right? A better way to do it would be to take a cookie and then being silent, not saying anything, we start to move the cookie over the dog's head towards their butt. And then they look up at the cookie, their weight shifts back and they sit down. And then we do this a couple of times and they catch on pretty quickly. So now we're going to say sit before we start moving the cookie. And this way we can make the cue sit, the predictor of moving the cookie and the dog sitting down. So now we've actually introduced the verbal cue in a way that is not frustrating to the dog, that's very clear and where they learn so much better. Sorry, that was kind of elaborate, but that was kind of, when I got started with training, I was like, dang, we humans have it really backwards. The majority of people really doesn't actually know how to train a dog. We think it's so intuitive, but it's really not. And so this is how I got started, right? Kind of, right from the basics. How do they actually learn? And then, I got more dogs over the years. I've worked with so many people. I'm very much into continuing education. I'm always going to seminars, taking lessons, using mentorship. And I really try to learn from as many people as possible along the way about all aspects of welfare, making sure that they're healthy. So some of my best friends are veterinarians. They've taught me so much in that regard. And making sure that I truly understand doggy body language. That's another aspect that's really misunderstood. And making sure that I can fulfill their inherent needs, even as they live as a captive animal with me, right? So every day, I try and make sure I fulfill their needs for physical exercise, mental stimulation, social time. So it really, the more I've been going along on this journey, the more complex this idea of living with dogs has become for me. And the training aspect really is a very small part of that. There's so much more to this, and I've really tried to teach that to my audience and my students.
So you say your audience, and you've also mentioned a little bit earlier that it's an online platform. Maybe just quickly elaborate on what actually your kind of vision also is.
Yeah. So like I said, I started out with in-person dog training, and then when the pandemic hit, we were no longer allowed to offer in-person dog training because it was not a necessary service, and I started to move more online. And I filmed training videos, put them online for people to enroll in courses and watch them and train their own dogs. And on the one hand, I really like this because it allowed me to show them the entire training journey. When you have a new student, it's very hard for them sometimes to see the vision, right? Because their goal maybe is that their dog comes when called when the dog's chasing a deer. On day one, the exercises we're going to do are not going to be close to a deer, So I always had my in-person students be a little skeptical at points where they're like, how is this first exercise actually going to get me to my end goal? And the online training allowed me to show them the entire progression and division. And I think this helps people commit to a training program better if they're like, okay, this makes sense. I see exactly where this is going. And then the other side was that I think this online training makes training very accessible for people who otherwise would not be able to have their dog trained. We have a lot of students whose dogs are really struggling with reactivity, which is a topic that's very close to my heart because those dogs usually are really not doing well, and not just in terms of how they act on walks. I mean, they're just so stressed and anxious and miserable often in day-to-day life. I want to help them. And these are the same dogs that you cannot take to a group class. They're going to lose their mind and pull their owners, their guardians over. And by offering those online classes for the dogs that would typically fail in-person training or would not be suitable for that, I was really able to help a lot more. And, you know, my vision really is to just make the lives of dogs and their people better. At the end of the day, we all got a dog because we had this idea of how they're going to make our lives better, right? We thought, oh, I'm going to get a dog and then we can take a lovely walk every day, or I'm going to take a dog and the dog can come with me to the farmer's market, or I'm going to get a dog and I'm going to take the dog to the library so that the kids can read to the dog. Like, we all had this positive vision. And for so many people, unfortunately, then the life with the dog does not turn out all this positive because of behavioral issues. But they just want to be our friends. I truly believe that. I truly believe they just want to be our companions and teammates and have great relationships with us as much as we want to have a great relationship with them. And I just really want to help people achieve that. But my own dogs are the light of my life. They add so much happiness to every single day, and I want everybody to experience that.
So do you actually feel also like this ethical responsibility as a dog trainer? I mean, to both parties that are involved, to the dogs and the guardians slash owners. How would you describe with your own words maybe this responsibility that you feel?
For me, it's really about making sure that both sides of the team are happy, because it's a relationship, you know. It's not that we can just make the human happy and then the dog has to deal with whatever we do. But it's also not that we just make the dog happy and then the human has to deal with it. And I think to find this balance where it's about compromises for many situations. You know, a lot of people live with dogs that maybe are a little bit mismatched to their lifestyle. And then it is about finding compromises for both sides. Mostly the human has to make a little bit of extra effort because the dogs usually already make a lot of effort to live with us. But for me, the ethical responsibility is about giving advice to people that will improve their lives, their dogs' lives, and their relationship.
I was just wondering, because you mentioned, I mean, dogs can have behavioral issues or other limitations emotionally, maybe even physically, like limits in regard to the training goals. And if this is in conflict, I know this is, I think, the worst scenario that I could just now describe. But maybe do you have examples that you have experienced where you had to deal with these limitations or these conflicts?
Yes. As far as physical limitations, it's usually the other way around. It's usually the physical limitations of the human that are the issue. It's pretty rare that we have a highly athletic human and a dog that's not very fit, and then we have a conflict there. Actually, I had one case where the human was a marathon runner, and she had this tiny, obese Chihuahua, and she told me she always takes the Chihuahua with her for like the first quarter mile of her training, and then the Chihuahua goes home, and then she runs her remaining 15 miles or whatever. But that's not very common. So physical limitations, if it's the other way around, if we have a human who is really not able to live up to the physical exercise needs of the dogs, that is tricky. So I have a bunch of cases where the human is maybe in their 70s, maybe even 80s, and they acquired a really high energy dog like German Shepherd, Doberman, Australian Shepherd, Kettle Dog, Border Collie. They are not able to fulfill this dog's needs for physical exercise. And then in these cases, I definitely make clear that we cannot turn the dog into a couch potato. We have to find ways to meet this dog's need to move their body, also just to be healthy and happy, and because it's fair to them, that are not impossible for the human. So maybe this means that we get the help of a dog walker. Maybe this means that the dog has to go to doggy daycare. But so physical exercise for the dog is actually one aspect that I am very keen about, because I think it's very much underestimated how much they have to move. You cannot make a high energy dog happy without moving. It's not going to happen. Regarding a mismatch of the training goals with the emotional limits of the dog, that's also something that I usually bring up very early when we work with a dog that has some behavioral concerns like reactivity or anxiety. And sometimes humans have unrealistic goals for this dog. So, such as, for example, we have a dog who's really dog reactive, cannot handle even seeing a dog 50, 100 feet away on a walk. And the human tells me the goal is that the dog goes to doggy daycare. So then I'm like, this will not happen. The chances that we can make this possible are very low. What is most likely very realistic is that the dog can go on a walk without reacting or without barking or pulling on the leash, but I cannot turn the dog into somebody who they are not. For me, any kind of behavior modification and training is about giving the dog the skills that they can live their best possible life and basically be the best possible version of themselves, but I'm not going to turn them into someone they're not. And, I've definitely worked with cases where the mismatch was so great that we did discuss rehoming as responsible rehoming as a possibility, because the human was just not ready to compromise on the limitations of the dog. And I think they all deserve to live in a home that accepts them for who they are and that helps them be the best possible version of themselves without trying to achieve something that is just completely unrealistic.
Mm. And then as a follow-up question on that, because, I live in Berlin, a huge city, still a lot of dogs, in this urban setting, and when without a dog, when I walk around and I see dog guardians with their dogs, I believe, or sometimes I see I observe situations where I have the feeling that the humans actually, most of the times they underestimate their influence, and I have also the same experience as a veterinarian now, as a practitioner in the clinic at work. And now I was wondering, in doing your work, it's a very, very close up to the owners and the dogs. Both questions, like for better or the worse, where the guardians most often underestimate their influence on the dog's welfare or behavior?
Yes, that's a really good question. Maybe this is a bit of a tangent, but I think it will come back to the question. In my opinion, there's a big issue with people having a lot of bias or having a lot of assumptions about their dog's behavior. They have this interpretation of who the dog is and what the dog does they're very unwilling to change it. Because, I mean, always when we have to change a bias that we have, right, that's a little bit painful and a little bit vulnerable, and we don't love doing this. And I think this leads to a lot of miscommunication and a lot of missed opportunities to get along better with the dog. One example, I had an in-person consultation many years ago, and it really stuck with me because it showed so much how this false assumption of their behavior can lead us down a really dangerous path. So this was a family, they had a Labrador, and this Labrador actually had a bite history. So this was a tricky case. And they were sitting on the couch, we were chatting, and the Labrador was sitting next to them. And the husband reached over and started to basically hug the dog and really be very physically intense with the dog. And the dog immediately started lip licking and blinking and yawning, which are all signs of discomfort. And I told him, you know, what you're doing right now is making your dog uncomfortable. These are clear signs that your dog is saying, I don't like this. And he said to me, oh, that's silly. My dog loves being hugged. She's just tired. And, you know, we have so much of this happening. People interpret their dog's behavior in so many elaborate ways, even when they come to me and they introduce their dog and their training goals. They have ascribed so many different ideas and reasons and causes for their dog's behavior, right? They're like, so my dog is distracted because it recently snowed, and also she is stubborn, and I'm like, this probably has nothing to do with it. And I think if people understand that we just have to strip away the assumptions and in a very factual and objective manner observe the dog's behavior and not attach too many of our own human interpretation and emotions, then we could actually train them much better and we could provide a much better life for them. Because coming back to the welfare, if, let's say, we are conscientious of their body language and we see a dog who's yawning when we hug them, we wouldn't say, my dog loves being hugged, she's just tired. We would say, oh, I guess my dog right now does not like this, I'm going to back off here. So I think people underestimate their ability to impact the dogs, both the dog's training and the dog's welfare, because they have made up all these stories and assumptions and reasons in their head. And maybe this is something you experience too. Maybe people come to you and they already have explanations for their dog's issues or such. You know, in my training world, so I have a golden retriever. He has allergies like many golden retrievers do. We work with a dermatologist. It's really well managed. But I'm very sensitive when I see other dogs that clearly are itching. I always tell them, please take your dog to a veterinarian. It's really uncomfortable. It can be well managed. This should be examined. So many people tell me, no, my dog's not itching. She's just shy. Or my dog always does this. Or my dog just doesn't like the collar. Or my dog just licks her paws to make them look nice. And I'm like, no, stop with all these interpretations. Just strip away the assumptions, you know, very objectively look at what's happening and then base your next steps off of that.
Mm. Yeah, that's very true. And it's so hard to tell the humans that maybe, just maybe, it's an interpretation of what they're doing right now, because it's a very emotional reaction most of the times that you get when you try to, like, get into that conversation.
Yes.
Another question that's actually like a new topic that I will open up is about dominance, because I mean, even now, when you go through like different, I don't know, blog posts, video clips or something, yeah, I still see and read sometimes concepts where dog training involves dominance. So it's nothing. It was definitely back in the days. I kind of talk about it as it has been, I don't know, before the wheel was invented or something. But this concept or this idea is still, it still exists. Yeah, what is your reaction to that? What is your perspective? What do you think about it? Is that something that you kind of, or like partially agree on, that you at some points need to use dominance as a tool for training? Or like, yeah, what would you say?
Yes. No, I do not agree with that at all. I've never used dominance in my own training. I think dominance starts where knowledge ends, basically. And the problem is that, once more, coming back to our discussion of the interpretation, it can look like it works. So let's say I have a dog that is jumping up on visitors like crazy, right? And then the guardian gets very mad at the dog, maybe grabs them by their scruffs or yells at the dog. The dog's probably gonna stop jumping because they're really intimidated, right? And then we interpret this as the dog having been successfully dominated and trained. And I think this is because pretty much the majority of behaviors that dogs do that we don't like would be stopped by the dog being quiet or physically still. So if we interact with them in an intimidating way, then yes, they will get quiet and physically still because they're intimidated. But it's not because we needed to dominate them. So it becomes this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Or with the, let's say, our initial example of teaching the sit, right? The dog doesn't know what sit means, and it's maybe jumping up on us happily and wagging the tail, and we get really mad and we shout at the dog, and we grab their collar. The dog's going to be intimidated. It's probably going to sit down just because they're like, I don't know what to do. And then the human's like, great, my dominance approach worked. No, it really didn't. You didn't teach the dog anything. If the dog is not doing a cue that you're asking for, the reason for that is never not enough dominance. You know, the reason is most likely the dog actually has no idea what that word means because we didn't teach it accurately. Maybe the reason is that the environment is too overwhelming for the dog to, in that moment, perform that cue. Maybe the reason is that there's other stressors going on. Maybe the dog's physically not feeling well. Maybe the dog is tired. Maybe the dog's exhausted. But not enough dominance is never the reason. And what ends up in households that use this kind of training approach is that because it does not actually teach the dog anything, you have to always interact with your dog this way, right? So let's say I get really mad at the dog when it doesn't sit down, when I say sit in a kind voice. Now, I didn't actually teach the dog anything. Now I always have to get mad at the dog when I want the dog to sit. Like, this is just not the way that I personally want to live in this world, you know? I want to live in harmony and peace and with kindness and love with my dogs, and dominance has never been a part of this. And, you know, my dogs are very well trained, both in daily life. We also do competition agility. They clearly have skills, and dominance was never a part of the training because not enough dominance is not the reason for a dog not being well trained.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, I mean, if you use dominance as a training method or as a way how you communicate and how you interact with your dog, it has its limitation in regard to like sustainability, and also going back to, I mean, the greater topic of this podcast, welfare. How does the dog feels in this relationship actually, right? So you've mentioned it, the way how you want to live with your with the other species around you, maybe not only dogs, but also other animals or non-human animals we have here on the planet, is, with love, with passion, and with kindness and so on. I think that's also what you need to ask yourself when you use dominance, like what kind of relationship do I actually want to have and practice in my daily life? Because it's not something that you do only on the weekend or I don't know, for an hour per day. It's something that you do the whole time because the dog is around you the whole time. Yeah.
And, I think it often comes from a place of helplessness or frustration where the human, they just do not know how to get the dog to behave. And they resort to this because they somehow need to make their life work, right? I've worked with cases where the dogs were jumping up on the human, and it was so much that, the arms were all scratched up, or they pushed the human over. So I can totally see why guardians arrive at this point where they're like, okay, this dog clearly needs to be dominated. But then also my experience has been, if we go in and we actually show them how we can do this in a kind and collaborative way with the dog, people are happy, right? Nobody is like, I choose to be mean to my dog, right? They just need to figure out a way that works for them. And coming back to what I said regarding where I see my vision as a dog trainer, I want to help them find a way with their dog where the dog is happy, the human is happy, and the team is happy.
Mm. But then another thought I had, some people told me, well, a dog or also other animals, I don't know, a horse, for example, also sometimes some horse people tell me this, is, well, these animals, they need a leader. They need someone to follow. And then this goes kind of hand in hand with dominance. Can we differentiate these two concepts or ideas? Is a leader also, is this needed from your experiences? Or do we again misinterpret something and misunderstand the animal's behavior?
Again, yes, I think this is a very human way to look at this. And I think it really serves our human ego to be like, oh, the dog needs a leader. The dog needs this and that. If we observe dogs freely interacting with each other or with the environment, it's not like they are all out of sorts unless they have a strong leader showing them what to do in every moment. They, in my opinion, actually, they have their own ideas. They have their own desires. When I live right next by the national forest, we go hike in the forest and on the mountain every single day for hours. And I observe my dogs a lot because I think it's so fascinating. I don't see them constantly looking for the leader or looking for somebody to tell them what to do. They experience the world just in their own right. And I think what they do want is good relationships, positive relationships. But I really don't think I would define that as leadership. And honestly, the leadership that the dogs probably would like is not the leadership that we would be willing to provide. So, for example, I'm sure my dogs, they're not allowed to, but they would love to chase bunnies and deer and, go hunt in the forest for dinner. I'm sure they would love that if I could run faster than them and I could help them chase and kill that deer. But I think that's maybe the kind of leader they would love. But when we talk about leadership, it always seems to come back to these very human concepts like, oh, the dog wants a leader to tell them to not pull on the leash. No, really, there's nothing in the dog that wants a leader to tell them to not pull on the leash, They are captive animals and their inherent desires and needs are very different from our own. And I think it's kind of a miracle they're even able to exist so well in our society. They're so adaptable already. And, maybe there's a difference between dominance as kind of a very aversive approach to dog training, and then leadership, which maybe some people would describe as a little more positive or I don't know, less negative approach. Once more, I would encourage everybody to strip away all the assumptions and interpretations that you have and really look at the specific situation and be like, is my dog's behavior in this situation truly a lack of quote unquote leadership, or is there something else going on here?
Yeah. Then let's go to the more positive aspect. Finally. So one of the things that we can also, how we can train dogs, and how we can build a relationship with them, together with them, as you've said, like in a collaborative way, is consent and choice. And I also think, there are choices can be done by dogs when they are just in a group by themselves. And as these two things, like consent and choice, are also have been becoming a part of the conversation in the dog training world. How would you describe these concepts in everyday practice, to be honest? Because I think sometimes you read about these things in a theoretical way, but the question is like, how do we actually apply it in practice?
Yes, very good question. And I think it comes back to what we said regarding body language. They communicate so much with us with their body language. And I think every dog guardian should be required to take some kind of education in reading doggy body language before ever living with a dog, because they do already opt in and opt out and choose and consent or not consent to so many things just with very subtle cues. So here's a really interesting case. Maybe it helps to have a concrete example to understand this. I had somebody email me and say they rescued a dog, and this dog is growling completely unprovoked at them. They're only in the same room walking by, and the dog is growling at them. And in these cases, I always ask for a video, because this could look very different from how they describe it or how, once more, they interpret it. So I'm like, I would like to see this. And they sent me a video. And in the video, you saw a human entering the living room, and the dog was curled up on the couch, resting. And the human approached the dog, and the dog showed no intent to interact with the human. So the dog didn't lift their head or wag their tail or maybe roll over. The dog just was laying there very still, awake but resting. And the human started to come closer to the dog, and maybe when the human was maybe 50 centimeters away, the dog started to move their head away, lick their lips, squint their eyes, which all are signs of, hey, right now I do not want to interact. And then the human stretched out the hand and started petting the dog. And at this point, the dog kind of got up halfway, started yawning. So even stronger signs of, I do not consent to this right now. I do not want to pet it right now. Please just leave me alone. And then the human, to my utter horror, went and laid their head on the dog. And this is when the dog started growling, and I actually wondered if this was going to go beyond growling, if, the human was going to be bit in the face by the dog. And the human interpretation of this was the dog starts growling completely unprovoked, where I'm like, no, the dog has said, I do not consent to being touched or approached or petted right now in 10 different ways that you did not realize. So then by the time that you put your hand on the dog, there was no quiet, subtle ways left for the dog to communicate this. So for me, the concept of consent and choice, it starts by truly understanding what the dog is trying to tell you with their behavior and being aware of these, for us, very subtle changes in body language that say, hey, I want this, or hey, I do not want this. And of course, there are things where the dog cannot choose, right? So obviously in veterinary practice, you have to treat them, you have to examine them. And if I'm outside and it starts raining, then I'm going to go inside, even if my dog would rather play some more fetch, right? But there are so many small choices throughout the day that the dog can make, also on walks. So many people want their dog to walk right next to them and heel position and look at them the whole time and never pull on leash. And to me, the dog should, in a safe way, have the choice to sniff or to decide where they want to go or to roll in the grass or to, explore the world on their own terms. And I think the more choice we can give to dogs, the more behavioral diversity we can see, which is a direct sign of welfare. And the happier they will then be to also choose us in training. So I have never had an issue with my own dogs not wanting to train or, wanting to run off or not listening or being distracted. And I think this comes exactly not from depriving them of choices. I think it comes from giving them all the choices. And then at the end of the day, they're still like, yeah, I want to hang out with mom. Yeah, she's really fun. And that's really the best situation you can have, right? In a relationship with a human, we would always behave that way. If we want somebody to become our friend, we're not gonna threaten them and be like, you better not hang out with anybody else other than me. That wouldn't want to make them be your friend, right? I think it's the same with dogs. The fuller their lives can be and the richer the experiences are, it's all just gonna come back in a good way for training too. It's not like you give your dog all these choices and you let them consent and then they're just gonna get out of control. The total opposite happens. And, in some way, I think this is also, it needs to go beyond our own ego because their lives are so short compared to ours. They're so, so short. We just have to make the absolute most of every single day. Where do we take the right to be like, oh, my dog's not allowed to sniff on a walk because I want to be their leader? No, this is their life as well. They only live once and they have much less time than we do. And I think it's our responsibility to make that time as fulfilled and happy and wonderful as we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. The last few bits that you talked about, like giving dogs the choices, also sniffing around or just playing with another dog. I mean, an urban setting is a very specific one. But when I look here, so we have a dog in our shared apartment, and sometimes I go out for the dog walk, and then suddenly I'm surrounded by these other dog people, and I'm like, poor creatures that are not allowed to play with each other. And sometimes there might be reasons. I mean, I don't know the other ones. But so often I feel sorry for them, because they only have like maybe 3 times a day where they are allowed to go outside. And then even then they can't really do their own things and choose. And we control so much as humans. We control when they get food, when they get water, even if they get water, for example. Yeah, sometimes I just feel sad for them when they can't really express themselves and interact with their own species, where it must be so natural for them because finally they understand each other and also the other one understands them. These are just like thoughts that I sometimes have when I look at dogs outside and especially the humans around them and how fearful sometimes they are of losing control or not really knowing what is going to happen, and maybe they had already bad experiences. It's a kind of a never-ending story of humans learning how to evolve this relationship, and as you said, like learning and understanding the animal's expressions and behavior. So maybe after this kind of monologue of myself, so I just assume you use like positive enforcement, game-based probably also. How does this change not the outcome, not the goal itself, but during the learning process, the emotional experiences that dogs have on the go, on the way? Because I think this is also really important, not only reaching the goal, but then what kind of environment you create for the learning phase.
Yes, this is so important. For dogs, I want training to be something that they hugely look forward to. And, I do agility with my own dogs. I have a training field on my property. When they just see me putting on the sneakers that I wear for training, they start bouncing up and down. They're so excited because they feel like superstars every single time we train. For so many people, training is about controlling the dog and making the dog do what you want them to do and so on. For me, training is about just lifting the dog up and making them glow with pride and happiness. It should be like at work, maybe your boss calls you into the office and says, "I'm so incredibly proud of you, Masha. You did the most wonderful job today. I've never seen anybody do a better job than you. You're so smart and kind and brilliant and productive." And now you're smiling, and that's the same smile I want to see on the dog's face in training. I want them to just feel incredibly accomplished and proud, and I want to make learning new things joyful, because that's what learning should be like. Learning, first of all, only works if you are not super stressed out. If dogs are extremely stressed, they will not be able to form new positive memories and emotions and associations. But also, I want this to be something that for the human and the dog, it's not a chore. It should be something they enjoy. I always tell my students, if thinking about training today makes you go like, "Oh, I don't want to do that," we have to change the training, right? It's like, if your best friend says, "Hey, can I take you out to dinner?" Your response would always be positive. This is how I want my dogs to feel when I say, "Hey, do you want to go train?" Right? I want them to be like, "Yes, absolutely. I can't wait to do this." So for me, this is what positive and game-based training that really takes into account the dog's emotional state looks like. So it's not just about the better outcomes. They will come. They will be part of the equation. But I also don't think it all has to be a means to an end. Even if the outcomes would be the same, training-wise, I think for the dog, that the fact that the dog was happier would still make this a better method, right? Because we are responsible for their well-being, and that includes also while learning all these complicated rules that we have in human life. Because all of this stuff we teach them is very unnatural. It's not natural for them to walk at a snail's pace next to us on an asphalt road. It's not. For the dog, that makes no sense. So, we think of all these silly rules for our modern life, then at least we need to be nice to them while we teach them. Or, all of these things that people get so upset about, the dog digging a hole in the yard or the dog stealing food off the counter. Those are all very natural doggy behaviors. And while I agree, yeah, your dog shouldn't be stealing food off the counter, we need to make training fun. I think this is our responsibility. If we take in a captive animal, to then make their lives as good as possible, and that includes while teaching them all our rules.
How do you see your role then? Because people come to you, so you have this team, dog-human team, or the other way around, human-dog team. What kind of trainers, maybe not only looking at yourself, but like what kind of trainers in plural do those teams need actually?
I think it's really important that they have trainers who are willing to take the time to understand both them and the dog. There are a lot of trainers who are very nice to the human and kind of mean to the dog, right? There also actually are some trainers who are very nice to the dog, but don't care all that much about the human. I think as a trainer, especially in the initial stages of the coaching relationship, you have to be like a therapist for both the dog and the human. You have to find out, okay, what are your fears? What are your hopes? What is stuff you enjoy? What are you worried about? And then find a way to make the best possible lifestyle happen for the dog and the human team. And this will look very different based on what dog and human team we're talking about. So an 80-year-old lady in Berlin with a Shih Tzu is going to have very different lifestyle goals from a 30-year-old athlete who lives with a cattle dog in the mountains, right? So I think that's really important that trainers come in, they understand where the human's at, they understand where the dog's at, and then they formulate a plan for this specific team to reach their goals.
You have been a trainer now for already a couple of years. Have you seen like approach shifts within the field, or also maybe during your journey of like still learning, or like still being on the learning process on being a dog trainer? Has your approach changed over time? And I don't know, is there something that you see in the near future, something new coming up that is already developing maybe, that I haven't heard of, and maybe also the audience hasn't heard of?
So one thing that's changed for me personally is the importance of enrichment and using food as enrichment. So when I first started training, like 12 years ago or so, you might give the dog a Kong or a bone, but this was not really an everyday thing, and there was not a lot of thought or planning around it. And especially in the last, I want to say 4 years or so, enrichment has become hugely important to me. And it actually started out with my golden retriever having bilateral elbow surgery and being on crate rest. And all of the things I was doing to fulfill his needs, like taking him on off-leash walks and letting him play with other dogs and so on, we could no longer do. And I had to figure out how to make his days as good as possible in this extremely limited space that I had available so he wouldn't injure himself. And I started to really get into all the different ways that we can use food, not just as a nutrition, but really as a way to increase behavioral diversity, improve welfare, and let them engage in their species-specific needs. So I started to not feed them food just as like a meal at all anymore. Now every single meal they get is in some form of food enrichment. So sometimes I use it for training. I use it a lot frozen in kind of frozen rubber bowls that they chew, or trays where they lick it, or I scatter it outside where then they go find it, or I put the little food pieces like in the bark of trees so they have to reach up and find it. And this has been a huge shift for me that I've been really trying to communicate to my students as well, as you can do so much just with your dog's daily food. You can entertain them for hours, really. And that's, what I had to do with my dog when he had this elbow surgery. I hate that this happened to him, but I think it really in hindsight helped me provide better instructions to my students, because this is this whole untapped field that I hadn't really thought about that hard before. And then I was like, oh my gosh, actually every single day they should, get their food through some kind of activity. Actually, just before this podcast, I filled their enrichment toys for the next couple of days. So I feed them kibble, so I soak the kibble, and then sometimes I mix it with some yogurt or pumpkin puree, and then I put it into the, the rubber bowls or such, and then I actually have a freezer just for my dogs, where then I freeze it. And this is something that I would love to become even more mainstream. Also, I feel that the conversation in dog training has moved a little bit more towards fulfilling the needs of the dog. For a long time, it was about just fulfilling the human's needs. And of course, the human does have needs in this relationship, like the need to not be pulled over, right? Or the need to not have the dog pee in the house or so. But the dog also has needs. And I feel like more people come to me now than even 5 years ago, and they say, how can I fulfill my dog's need for physical exercise or for mental stimulation? And this always makes me really happy that people are asking this question, that people are aware of this aspect of living with dogs, and they're looking for ways to make sure this works out.
Now, that's really interesting to hear about enrichment specifically, or especially. Because this is also a term or like a topic that is really often discussed when I talk to wild animal experts in captivity, right? So animals in zoos. This is always a big discussion when you talk about welfare, that enrichment is needed in different ways and forms. So it's very interesting also to see, because I mean, in the end, even though they are domestic animals, they are also under captivity. They are under human care. So it's interesting to see the similarity here in this, the non-domestic and the domestic animals, but both living under human care. Yeah, really, really interesting. If you could give the audience, the listeners, one advice or something, just a message that is really important for you, I don't know, maybe a topic that is dear to your heart, what would you say?
One big piece of advice that I have, and I don't know how common it is in Germany to have multiple dogs. I know how many people just have one dog versus 2 or 3. But here in the US, a lot of families have multiple dogs and they're completely overwhelmed. So one piece of advice would be, if you currently have one dog and you feel like, I would love to have 2 dogs, do address all issues of dog number 1 first. Otherwise, it will just become complete chaos and everything will get so much harder. It's so tricky to solve behavior cases and training difficulties in families that have multiple dogs that maybe didn't get their needs met, that haven't had foundational training, that have some reactivity or separation anxiety or house soiling. It becomes incredibly complex. So I really want you, I tell people, if you have the wish to have another dog, I want you to ask yourself, would you be okay if your current dog's behavior never gets better? And if the answer to this is no, then you shouldn't get the second dog, because chances are that once you add another dog, you're going to be occupied with that dog. You're not going to go full steam on behavior modification of dogs 1's issues. So this would be a really big advice I have for people, once more coming from the standpoint of just wanting to make the dog and human team happy. And, I actually talk about this frequently on my social media, and somebody once said, this is so silly. You are a dog trainer. Why are you discouraging people from having dogs? And I was like, if I just wanted to sell maximum dog training, I would encourage everybody to go to the shelter today and pick up the worst behaved dog they have. then I could definitely sell a lot of dog training, but that's not my goal. My goal is for you to live the most fulfilled, happy life possible with the dog that you have. And adding another dog sometimes makes this a lot harder, especially once you get to a point where maybe you cannot walk them together. I have a bunch of clients who have multiple dogs and they have to walk them separately. Now every dog's walk gets shorter, right? And the time you spend with them overall has to be divided. So that would be one really big piece of advice for the future for everybody listening who's considering getting another dog. Really wait until you're happy with dog one's behavior, and then you will have a good time with 2 dogs. But if you rush this, it will get very complicated.
Yeah, in the end, it's about making a decision that is thought through. That's basically it.
Yes, and I see a lot of people rescuing dogs that they feel sorry for or getting that cute puppy. And I know it comes from a good place, but you have to think about the next decade or so that you're going to spend with 2 dogs. And a decade with 2 dogs that both have severe behavioral issues is going to be a hard 10 years in your life. And it's probably going to be difficult for the dogs as well. For me, I hate to see when the world of a dog and their human gets smaller. When things happen that makes them have fewer experiences and they have to restrict what they do together. And if people get a second or third dog too quickly, this is what happens. Because then those dogs maybe cannot be running off leash together or even be walked on leash together, or maybe now you're limited in taking them places or going on a vacation or training them together or so. I don't want this. I want people to just maximize the heck out of the life they have with their dog because their lives are so short. We need to make every single day count.
Yeah, that's so true. No, thank you very, very much for that. I mean, very honest. It might seem brutal, but at least it's an honest piece of advice that people need to hear. And yeah, in the end, it's actually what you just said. It's making their life, because we're responsible for them. We bring them in our lives, so we have to take responsibility for that action that we just did. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge, your experiences, and that we could dive into that topic together.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on.
Then, yeah, that's it for today again on Dare to Care. Thank you also, listeners, for taking the time to listen in again, and I hope you've taken something away with you. Gained also new insights, I did, and probably you have plenty to talk about the next time you meet your friends, family, the next dog owner and guardian. As always, you will find lots of interesting links and also more information about this topic in the show notes, so be sure to take a look. If you liked what you heard today, then give us a lovely review, and 5 stars would be awesome. I'd love to hear also your thoughts, ideas, feedback, questions if you have, either in the comments, also by email and podcast.daretocare@gmail.com, or also on Instagram directly at daretocare_podcast. If you don't want to miss a next episode, then just follow us on Instagram or LinkedIn. So, see you next time. And remember, we need to stand up for others, especially for the non-human animals among us. Bye-bye.